Let's jump on to wine number 3. Pour myself some, then pass it around. Here we are. All right, this next one, also a favorite of mine. Another producer that we have a rep here that lives here in Dallas, and I've told him he comes and frequents here every once in a while. In fact, I had lunch with him here right before the big snowstorm, probably one of the last days you guys were open. We shared a bottle of this together. This is called Barnett Vineyards Chardonnay, and again, I'd like to see who has tried this already. Okay, a good amount of you, awesome. So this one also does really well for you guys. Barnett is another favorite, actually, winery of mine when it comes to Napa Valley. So Barnett Vineyards is in Napa Valley. Not only in Napa Valley, they're actually located, beautiful, beautiful winery way up on the top of what's called Spring Mountain. If you're not familiar with kind of what Napa Valley topography looks like when you look at a map of Napa north to south, Spring Mountain is the mountain range that's connected to Diamond Mountain up in the northwestern corner of Napa Valley. So if you guys know, the valley floor is like Oakville and Rutherford, St. Helena as you go north, and then it gets into Calistoga. Basically, if you're in St. Helena or Calistoga in the north, the mountain range right to your west is Spring Mountain. That's where this winery is located. They are not just on the mountainside, they are literally at the top of the mountain. It's a gorgeous view up there. In fact, I've been to the winery twice, even before I worked for Victory Wine Group. I've just always been a fan of this winery. And they are, when you get to the bottom of the mountain, basically, to get up to the winery, it's a 30-minute drive around the mountain, basically, going back and forth, up these winding roads. You're looking down the cliff. It's crazy. You finally get up to the top and enter in through the gates of Barnett Vineyard. So gorgeous scenery. I always tell people, whether you've been in Napa Valley once or 100 times or never, next time you go, try to get in here or let me know and I'll get you in here, because this is an awesome, awesome winery to visit. Anyway, this wine is not coming from their property on Spring Mountain. Chardonnay just doesn't do really well, quite honestly, with the heat of Napa Valley. A lot of times there are a few producers that make Napa Valley or Spring Mountain Chardonnays, but they think that the best Chardonnay vineyards are going to be toward the south of Napa Valley, and that's where this is coming from, a place called Carneros. Are you guys familiar with Carneros? So the southern part of Napa, it actually crosses over into Sonoma. So there is a Sonoma side of Carneros and a Napa side of Carneros. This is coming from the Napa side. A single vineyard, again, like that last wine, called the San Giacomo Vineyard. If you're familiar with San Giacomo or not, this is a vineyard that was sort of, its claim to fame, as it were, is back in it's called the 1976 Tasting of Paris. If you guys are familiar with that, basically what put Napa wines on the map was this big blind tasting that a bunch of American wineries were put up against French wineries, the top wineries in the world. Well, Chateau Montelena, which is still a winery in existence, they won sort of the best white wine. And it's a little known fact that a good portion of their fruit that won that tasting, that put Napa wines on the map before anyone even knew what they were, came from this vineyard, the San Giacomo Vineyard. So this is a really cool vineyard that's been around for a long time. The San Giacomo family that's their last name. They're just farmers, they're growers that have been growing Chardonnay, as well as a couple other varieties in Carneros for a long, long time. And so it's a great property, great old vine Chardonnay, and the Barnett family has had a relationship with them for years and have been making this Chardonnay for, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 20 years. They've had a long-term relationship with this family. So anyway, single vineyard Chardonnay. I want to do these two sort of side by side, because this one you'll find is very well balanced. You guys tell me again what you think. I think some Chardonnays, some people that don't like, I'll put it this way, some people that don't like Chardonnays don't like when they're big and buttery and oaky and creamy and so over the top. And then some people absolutely love that style, and they're like, if it's not hitting me with a mouthful of oak, then I'm not going to like it. So there's kind of Chardonnay is what I always say, and you guys who were with me about a month ago and did one of these trainings would remember, I don't see any middle ground in the world of Chardonnay. It's like people either love the heavy oak and cream and butter and love things like, the big names that you see all over the place, and then there's some people that like very clean, unoaked, easy drinking styles. This one would be more toward that other side, the clean, easy drinking, more like Burgundy style Chardonnay, in my opinion. It still has a little bit of that butter and cream, and it would appease those people, but I think it's much more kind of, the winemaker is going for in style here to be more of a Burgundian or a wine like the wines of Burgundy, France, if that makes sense. So I'm going to try it right now and let you guys have a chance to try it if you haven't already. Looks like a lot of you already have, but I'd love to hear your thoughts as I try this. What's that? What's that, sorry? A little sweet. Okay, so I would probably, let me try it. Yeah, so what I would say, and again, just for your selling, tactics with your customers, I wouldn't say that's sweetness you're getting, that's fruitiness. So fruity, the thing is a lot of people, consumers, people in wine, they confuse sweet, which literally in the world of wine means residual sugar. So like in a Moscato or a Riesling, okay, those have residual sugar and are sweet, kind of like soda pop has, or Dr. Pepper or anything, has residual sugar. It has a lot of sugar in it. Moscato has sugar. There's other wines anyway that have sugar. This is going to be a chemically dry wine, but has a lot of fruitiness on the palate, which can kind of present itself as sweet, but isn't sweet. The reason why I say that, and why you might just want to, whenever you're talking to a guest, explaining them, I wouldn't say to them that this is sweet, because when a customer or a guest hears sweet, they are thinking of Moscato, Riesling, those kind of like to the ultimate end of sweet, right? And then that could turn them off, completely. Whereas if you compare this with a Moscato, they're nowhere close to each other, right? I mean, this is fruity, whereas a Moscato is fruity and sweet. Does that kind of make sense? So that's why I'd say maybe you're getting, a little bit of, sweetness, but when I think of sweetness, I think of sugar. Fruitiness is what I would call this, just as a clarification. Did you have something? Oh, okay. I thought you you looked like you were about to start to say something.
Official terminology for such a thing would be off-dry and fruit forward.
Yep, fruit forward is a great way to put it, definitely. Mm-hmm. What else? Anybody else have any thoughts on this?
How long does it support stainless?
What's that?
Do you know how long does it support the stainless?
Yeah, so I want to be clear. It isn't completely unoaked. It does see oak, but it's mostly used oak, okay? So I think this is only, on any given vintage, 20 to 30% new oak, and then the other 70, 80% is used.
It's very subtle.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why it does have some oak, but then the rest is in stainless steel and concrete. Usually for about 12 to 16 months is on average for this wine.
So if it's used oak, is it just bourbon barrels or what?
No, it's used oak in the world of wine just means they've had a vintage in it prior. Oh, okay. So new barrels, they'll use, again, 20%, let's say, on this wine. So 20% of the barrels here are first use oak. Brand new, just been charred, just been built, whatever. Then once a wine has sat in that for a vintage or two vintages, it becomes what we call used oak. It's been used for wine the entire time, but it's just second use, third use, fourth use, so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yes.
Does wine have some type of malolactic fermentation?
Yes, definitely. So that's a great thing to bring up. So who is familiar with the term, and I know we talked about this last time as well, malolactic fermentation? Anybody familiar with that term? Yeah? Few of you? Okay. Again, this isn't something you'd usually have to bring up with guests by any means. However, since the gentleman asked, I'll just walk you through it quickly. So, because it's very interesting. If you still have some of this, put it on your palate, swirl it around a little bit, and then swallow it or spit it or what have you. You'll get a little bit of this creaminess, right? It's not necessarily oaky, it's creamy, okay? So when we get a creaminess in wine, that can come from a couple things, but it's usually from this process that this gentleman brought up called malolactic fermentation, or what we in the wine world just short form to mallow. What that is, it's very simple to think about it this way. It's all in the name. Malolactic fermentation. Malic acid, which is the first part of that, malic acid is kind of the, think of if you bite into a underripe green apple, okay? Picture that in your mouth, or picture that in your head. You bite into a green apple, what do you get? Sour, right? Sour, like bright acidity, basically, right? A lot of acid and sourness. That is malic acid at work, okay? So there is malic acid in wine. If you don't go through malolactic fermentation, you would get a lot more of that acid. But that process, what it does is turns malic acid into lactic acid. Lactic, like lactose. Think of like milk. Milk has acid, but it's a much softer, creamier acid. Okay, does that make sense? So that fermentation process that usually happens after the alcoholic fermentation, usually it happens in barrel with these guys and most other wineries, is that the malic acid turns into, over time, or the lactic acid turns malic acid, turns into lactic acid, which is a creamy, softer acid. Does that make sense? So that's when we say mallow or malolactic fermentation, that's what that is. It's turning harsh acids into soft acids, and that's where you get that creaminess, okay? So great question. Yes, and yes, this wine does go through malolactic fermentation. Kind of as an aside, while I pour the next one, a fun little trivia thing is a lot of people think of malolactic fermentation with white wines, like Chardonnay is actually the one people mostly think of it as, but little trivia for your friends to use on them. There's actually more red wines in the world that go through mallow than white wines. Can anyone tell me why that would be? Oh, I don't know why I gave you my cup. Here, have a drink after me. You have the bottle, okay? We'll do that the other way around. Anyone tell me why more red wines go through malic than white?
Soften the tannins.
Sort of. Anything else? Any other ideas? Kind of, yeah. I mean, think about it. When you drink a red wine, 80% of the red wines in the world, do they have that bright, harsh acid when you think of like biting into a green apple? No, right? So most red wines actually go through malolactic fermentation because they don't want those harsh acids presenting themselves in rich, full-bodied red wines. So it just happens, but nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about mallow in reds, even though it actually happens more often in reds, probably just because the creaminess presents itself more often in things like Chardonnay. So as we get into this next one, again, I wanted to do these two kind of side by side because this is fun to try